Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Nvidia's GT 710 is 9 years old now, would you believe? Originally launching in March 2014, it also had a re-release of sorts with a slightly tweaked GPU in 2016 at a price of around 35 to 45 US dollars, or around £30 in the UK at the time. The GT 710 used Nvidia's Kepler 2.0 architecture with a clock speed of 954 MHz. It came in options of either 1GB or 2GB of DDR3 or GDDR5 memory. The DDR3 version running at 1800 megatransfers per second effectively, with the much faster GDDR5 version running at 5000 megatransfers. On its release, Nvidia's original intention for the GT 710 was for use as a multi-monitor video adapter, as it supported up to 3 HD resolution monitors with its DVI, VGA and HDMI outputs. Nvidia also made the claim that it was up to 10 times faster than iGPUs of the time. Yeah, maybe not Nvidia. What it's most known for today though is its inclusion in the borderline scam systems sold by certain system builders. And when I say borderline scam, I mean it's just an outright scam, because you might see the GT 710 pop up in so-called gaming computers, even though the GT 710 is most certainly not a gaming capable card. Nvidia themselves didn't even intend for this to be sold as a gaming card. And 9 years on, some of you might be surprised to know that the GT 710 is actually still being sold brand new. I found this particular one here on, I think, eBuyer here in the UK, selling for more than its relaunch price in 2016. So considering that it's still being sold brand new today, we're going to give it a test to see how the GT 710 holds up in some of today's latest and most played games. The one we're testing today isn't exactly the best example of the GT 710s. It's MSI's passive version of the card. This particular version only has 1GB of DDR3 memory, running at a slightly slower 1600 megatransfers per second, and a core clock of 954 MHz. So considering that it's only the DDR3 version rather than the better performing GDDR5 version, I've also given it an overclock with the clocks you're seeing on screen now to give it the absolute best chance to perform well in the games we're going to be testing today. The specs I'm using for the benchmark system today are on screen now, and I've also put them in the description down below if anyone needs to use a screen reader. I'm using these parts in particular because it absolutely guarantees that no possible bottleneck will hold the GT 710 back. Not that that would be even remotely possible. So let's fire into our first game for today. So we're starting off with CSGO today, and I've decided to use 720p because that's probably about where you want to be resolution-wise with the GT 710, at least the DDR3 version anyway. And I'm also using the lowest settings with 16x anisotropic filtering as well. And to my surprise, the game overall actually runs really well on the lighter maps like Mirage and Overpass. More intense maps like Anubis can show some brief micro stuttering, but even then they never drop below 30 FPS throughout, which obviously isn't great for competitive gameplay, but if you're using a GT 710 to game, competitiveness probably isn't your main priority here. Generally though, across the game, we're seeing no lower than around 60 FPS. There is the occasional very minor hitch, but otherwise we're often getting around 80 to well over 100 FPS outside of those heavier maps. And on to GTA 5 now, a game that released in 2013 on consoles originally, and then had its PC release in 2015. We managed a bit more than 720p here. We were using 1080p with 75% resolution scale, which equates roughly to 1440 by 810 resolution wise. I'm also using the normal settings, which is the game's lowest settings effectively, with 16x anisotropic filtering. With the overclock I mentioned before, we were actually getting some artifacts on screen, so I dropped the memory overclock to plus 205, and that seemed to sort most of them. I think there were still one or two I noticed throughout, so ideally you probably want to drop that just a little bit more, but otherwise GTA 5 is actually surprisingly playable throughout. There's a few minor moments of stuttering, but only on the highway when small dust clouds appear behind the other cars. So there's effectively no problems at all throughout the game. We're even averaging 32 FPS, and with percentile figures of 26.1 and 20.7 FPS. That does suggest a little bit of stuttering, but I personally didn't actually see any throughout the test at all. Generally, the GT710 does manage to maintain at least 30 FPS throughout, but it can drop to the mid to high 20s in parts of the inner city, but otherwise it does stay in the 30 to mid 30s range throughout. The frame times are also really consistent across the board, so the game actually still appears quite smooth even when it does drop below 30 FPS. It was at this point I started to realise that more than half of the games I'm testing in these videos nowadays are actually first or third person shooters, and here's another one for you, Rainbow Six Siege. Now this I definitely couldn't run at 720p on the GT710. I did set the resolution to 720p, but I used TAA at 25%, which by Rainbow Six maths is 640 by 360 resolution wise. It was quite blurry at these settings, so I also applied 80 on the sharpening scale as well, which actually made it look pretty damn good considering the base resolution. And this is with the lowest settings and medium textures, using 16x anisotropic filtering. And overall the game ran relatively well, managing to average 36.6 FPS, with pretty reasonable percentile figures as well. The game, despite the low settings and resolution, also still managed to look good enough to be competitive. Frame times were really consistent throughout, and I didn't see any kind of stuttering or hitches to speak of, which a 1% and 0.1% low seemed to suggest. All in all, it was a fun one to test. Moving on to probably the biggest surprise in the test today is Fortnite. This also managed to run at more than 720p, 1080p with 70% resolution scale to be precise, which equates to 1344 by 756 resolution wise. I also used the performance mode with the lowest settings and far view distance. This also needed the overclock on the memory dropped to plus 205 as well. Probably a bit more it could have done with actually too, because there was still some artifacting I noticed, although again that didn't actually cause any problems throughout. And other than being quite stuttery on the battle bus after you jump out, the game actually runs really well. We're averaging 73 FPS, with percentile figures in the mid to high teens, which does suggest some stuttering, but that stutter was only really after you jump from the battle bus, because once on the ground, the game actually runs surprisingly well. The frame rate at no point dropped below 60 FPS. There can be some minor micro stuttering at times, but generally the game actually manages to run really well. And I was genuinely surprised the 710, especially the DDR3 version, is even managing to run Fortnite. It is a game that released in 2016, but recently, some point this year I think, I'm not sure, had an update using the Unreal 5 engine, which has made the game a lot more demanding than it used to be. But here it is, running on a DDR3 equipped GT710. And we're finishing off with The Witcher 3, specifically the next gen update to the game. And surprisingly this does actually manage to run in full DX12 mode. The 710 technically does support DX12, but only up to a feature level of 11.0. DirectX 11 mode runs no better or worse with the same settings though, those being 720p with the lowest settings. Overall it is playable in inverted commas, but it's not a great experience particularly. We're averaging 16 FPS with percentile figures around the high single figures to 10 FPS for the 1% low. The frame times are quite consistent though, so it runs smooth, if you can call it that, but Geralt is quite difficult to control due to a combination of the low frame rate and how laggy the controls feel here. I'm not sure if the laggy controls are just a part of the game. It has been quite a while since I've played The Witcher 3, and I haven't played the next gen update to it at all, or if it's just a consequence of using such underpowered hardware. So there you have it then. The GT710, one of the oldest graphics cards still sold brand new today, is actually managing to perform pretty well, all things considered. I'm particularly impressed with how well it managed to run Fortnite. As I said, that has become quite a hard game to run despite its art style, due to its recent update to the Unreal 5 engine. But the 710 was still managing to run it to more than playable levels. So with the GT710 then, if you just want a video adapter to give you an HDMI output on a motherboard which doesn't have one, but also something that can still do light-ish gaming, then the 710 is definitely a decent shout for your money. I would personally go with the GDDR5 version if you can get that though, as that is going to perform probably significantly better than the DDR3 version. The only thing I would mention though is the price. It is still being sold brand new, the GT710, but it is currently, at least in the UK anyway, being sold for more than what it originally cost back in 2014, which is a complete and utter rip-off for what you're actually getting. I would definitely consider the second-hand market though. Places like CEX here in the UK, for example, currently have the DDR3 version of the 710 on sale for only £15. And when it's in stock, the GDDR5 version only costs a few pounds more. But whatever you do, I would definitely not ever buy the GT710 brand new. So if you enjoyed the video today, I'd appreciate a like, and let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below, including your thoughts on the GT710 as well. And as always, if you'd like to see more content like this, I'd really appreciate a subscribe to the channel as well. And if you'd like to support the channel in creating these videos, the link to my Ko-fi page is on screen now, and I'll also put it in the description down below. But for now, hopefully you all enjoyed the video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.